Ladies and gentlemen, go forth, do great things, mind, body, and spirit. One of my absolute favorite books that I had to read and got to read at the same time, my last year of college, was The Republic by Plato. So let's revisit the introduction. If you haven't read it, you definitely should. It is very dry, but it is very interesting. So, The Republic by Plato, translated by Benjamin Jowett. So, as an introduction, each chapter is called books, right? You've got 10 set books. So, the introduction. The Republic of Plato is the longest of his works with the exception of the Laws, and is certainly the greatest of them. There are near approaches to modern metaphysics in Philebus and the Sophist, and the Politicus or Statesman is more ideal. The form and institutions of the state are more clearly drawn out in the Laws, as works of art, the Symposium, and other Protagoras are of higher excellence. But no other dialogue of Plato has the same largeness of view and the same perfection of style. No other shows an equal knowledge of the world, nor contains more of those thoughts which are new well as old, and not one age, but of old. Nowhere in Plato is there a deeper irony or a greater wealth of humor or imagery, or more dramatic power. Nor in any other of his writings is the attempt made to interweave life and speculation, or connect the politics with philosophy. The Republic is centered around which the other dialogues may be grouped. Here, philosophy reaches the highest point into which ancient thinkers ever attain. Plato, among the Greeks, like Bacon among the moderns, was the first to conceive a method of knowledge, although neither of them was always distinguished in the bare outline or form of the substance of truth. And both of them had not to be content with the abstract science of the was not realized. He was the greatest metaphysical genius who has ever roamed the world scene, and in him, more than any other ancient thinker, the gems of the future knowledge are contained. The science of logic and psychology, which have supplied so many instruments of thought through after ages, are based upon the analysis of Socrates and Plato. The principles of definition, the law of contradiction, the fallacy of arguing in a circle, the distinction between the essence and accidents of being or notion, between means and ends, between causes and conditions, also the division of the mind into the rational, conspicuous, and irresistible elements, or of pleasures and desires necessary, unnecessary. These and other great forms of thought are all of them to be found in the Republic, and were probably first invented by Plato. The greatest of all logical truth, and the one which the writer of philosophy are most apt to lose sight, the difference between the words and the things, has been most strenuously insisted on by him. Although he has not always avoided the confusion of them in his own writings, but he does not bind them up with truth and logical formulae. Logic is still veiled in metaphysics, and the science which he imagines to contemplate all truth and all existence is very unlike the doctrine of syllogism, which Aristotle claims to have discovered. Neither must we forget that the Republic is but the third part of a still larger design, which is to have included the ideal history of Athens, as well as the political physical philosophy. The fragment of Critias and all given birth to the world famous fiction, second only in the importance to the tale of Troy and the legend of Arthur, and is said as a fact to have inspired some of the early navigators of the 16th century. The mythical tale of which the subject was the history of wars and Athenians against the islands of Atlantis is supported to be founded upon an unfinished poem of Solon, to which it would have been stood the same relation as the writings of the logographers to the poems of Homer. It would have told a struggle for liberty, intended to represent the conflict of Persia and Hellas. We may judge from the noble commencement of Timaeus, from the fragment of Critias itself, and the third book of the Laws, which Mayor Plato would have treated this argument. We can only guess why the great design was abandoned. Perhaps because Plato became sensible of the incongruity of the fictitious history, or because he had lost his interest in it, or because the advancing years forbade the completion of it. And we may please ourselves with the fancy that he is the imagery narrative ever be finished. we should have found narrative ever be finished with Plato himself sympathizing with the struggle for Hellenic independence, singing a hymn of triumph over Marathon and Salamis. Perhaps making the reflection of Herodotus, where he contemplates the growth of Athenian empire, how brave a thing is freedom of speech, which has made Athenians so far exceed every other state of Hellas in greatness. Or probably, attributing the victory to the ancient good or order of Athens and to the favor of Apollo and Athene. Again, Plato may be regarded as the captain, archegos, or leader of a godly band of followers, for in the Republic is to be found the original of Cicero's The Republic of St. Augustine's City of God, the Utopia of Sir Thomas More, and the numerous other imagery states which are framed upon the state model. The extent to which Aristotle and the Aristotelian school were indebted to him when the politics had been little recognized, and the recognition is more necessary because it is not made of Aristotle himself. The two philosophers had more in common than they were conscious of, and probably some of the elements of Plato's remain still undetected in Aristotle. In English philosophy, too, many affinities may be traced, and not in the works of the Cambridge Platonists, but in great original writers like Berkeley or Coleridge. To Plato and his ideas, that there is truth a higher experience of which a mind bears witness to herself, and his conviction in which the own greatness has enthusiastically asserted, and is perhaps gaining ground. Of the Greek authors who had the Renaissance brought a new life into the world, has the greatness of influence. The Republic of Plato is also the first treatise upon education of which the writing of Milton and Locke, Rousseau, Jean-Paul, and Goethe are legitimate descendants. Like Dante or Bunyan, he has a revelation of another life. Like Bacon, he is profoundly impressed with the unity of knowledge. In the early church, he exercised a real influence on theology, and the revival of literature on politics. Even the fragments of his own words, repeated at second hand, have in all ages ravished the hearts of men who have seen reflected in them their own higher nature. He is the father of idealism in philosophy, in politics, and literature. And many of the last conceptions of modern thinkers and statesmen, such as the unity of knowledge, the reign of law, and the equality of the sexes, have been anticipated in a dream by him. Argument? The argument of the Republic is to search after justice, the nature of which is first hinted at Cephalus, the just and blameless old man. Then discussed on the basis of proverbial morality by Socrates and Polemarchus, the caricatures by Thrasymachus, and participally explained by Socrates, reduced to an abstraction by Glaucon and Adeimantus, have become invisible to the individual reaper at length in the ideal state which is constructed by Socrates. The first care of the rulers is to be education, of which outline is drawn up by the old Hellenic model, providing only for an improved religion and morality, and more simply in music and gymnastic, manlier strain of poetry, and greater harmony of individually the estate. We are thus led to the conception of a higher state, in which no man calls anything his own, and in which there is neither marrying nor giving in marriage, and kings are philosophers, and philosophers are kings. And there is another higher education, intellectual as well as moral religious, of science as well as art, and not of youth but only a whole of life. Such a state is hardly to be realized in the world and would quickly degenerate. To the perfect ideal succeeds the government of the soldier and the love of honor. This, again, declining into democracy, and democracy into tyranny, in imagery, but regular order having not resembled to the actual facts. When the wheels have come full circle, we do not begin again with a new period of human life, but we have passed from the best period to the worst, and there we end. The subject is then changed into the old quarrel, poetry and philosophy, which had been more lightly treated in earlier books of the Republic, now is resumed and fought out to a conclusion. Poetry is discovered to be an imitation thrice removed from the truth, and Homer, as well as dramatic poets, have been condemned as an imitator, sent to banishment along with them. And the idea of state is supplemented by the revelation of a future life. The division into books, like all other similar divisions, is probably later than the age of Plato. The natural divisions are in five in number: one book, and I first have book two down to the paragraph beginning. I had always admired the genius of Glaucon and Admetus, which is introductory. First book containing refutation of the popular sophisticated notion of justice, and concluding, like some of the earlier dialogues, which are without arriving at any definite result. To this apprehended restatement of nature of justice according to common opinion, and an answer to demand the question, what is justice, stripped of appearances? The second division, too, includes the remainder of the second book of the Holy of the third and the fourth books, which are mainly occupied with the construction of the first state and the first education. The third division, 3, consists of the fifth, sixth, and seventh books, in which philosophy rather than justice is the subject of inquiry. And the second state is constructed on principles of communism and ruled by philosophers. And the contemplation of the idea of good takes the place of the social politics for political virtues in the eighth and ninth books. The perversions of states and of the individuals who correspond to them are reviewed in succession. And the nature of pleasure and the principle of tyranny are further analyzed in the individual man. The 10th book, 5, is the conclusion of the whole, in which the relations of philosophy to poetry are finally determined, and the happiness of the citizens in his life, which have now been assured, is crowned by the visions of another. Or, a more general division of the two parts may be adopted. The first books, 1 through 5, containing description of the state, framed in general accordance with Hellenic notions of religion and morality, while in the second book, 5 through 10, the Hellenic state is transformed in the ideal kingdom of philosophy, of which all other governments are the perversions. These 2 points of view are really opposed, and the opposition is only veiled by the genius of Plato. Check that out. We'll go over the characters later.